During the 1980s, flipping through television channels almost always meant encountering Justine Bateman. Portraying Mallory Keaton on the popular sitcom Family Ties, she became one of America's most familiar faces, until the series ended and she seemed to vanish from the spotlight. For years, her departure from Hollywood appeared as an unexplained mystery. Now, Bateman is finally opening up about her reasons for leaving and disclosing where she has been all along. This narrative explores growing up in retrospect and the quiet transformation of Justine Bateman. Well before cameras, fame, and her daily presence on screens, Bateman was already living a life marked by movement and change. Her mother, Victoria Elizabeth, had crossed borders from Malta to various regions of the United Kingdom before working as a flight attendant for Panama. Her father, Kent Bateman, provided a more conventional anchor to that mobility, yet together they built a world not originally intended for Hollywood. Gradually, that world shifted, and Justine found herself entering something far larger than anyone had planned. Within her own family, a subtle industry connection already existed through her younger brother, Jason Bateman. Still, none of it seemed destined to unfold as it eventually did. By the time she attended Taft High School in Woodland Hills, her life's direction had started focusing into something more specific. Early opportunities arrived, bringing obligations that left little room for anything else. College, a natural next step for most, simply was not feasible, not from lack of desire, but because her schedule had already been consumed by something far more demanding. That demand became unmistakable in 1982 when she took on the role that would quietly alter everything. When Family Ties first aired, it did not simply arrive as another sitcom seeking its audience. It rapidly became impossible to ignore. Set against a transforming America, the show tapped into a cultural friction that felt genuine at the time. Parents who had once embraced the free-spirited 1960s were now raising children with vastly different worldviews. At the heart of that divide stood a family both familiar and distinctly outlined, with Michael J. Fox's Alex Keaton representing a fresh ambition that collided with everything his parents stood for. While Alex became the centerpiece, Justine's Mallory Keaton occupied a space equally memorable, though more quietly. Mallory was not motivated by politics or ideology. She came across as shallow, absorbed by fashion, boys, and surface-level concerns that people often dismissed. Yet something about her made the character endure. She was neither harsh nor cynical. A softness and warmth balanced how she was written. Over time, that contrast became part of the show's rhythm, something viewers anticipated without necessarily realizing it. As the series grew, so did its audience. It was not merely successful. It became one of the nation's most watched programs, drawing tens of millions of viewers at its peak. Week after week, it remained near the top, turning its cast into unavoidable familiar faces. For Justine, that meant growing up under such attention, staying with the role from the very beginning in 1982 straight through to the final episode in 1989. Even outside the show, moments like hosting Saturday Night Live in 1988 underscored how visible she had become and how securely she had settled into that world. Behind her smile lay a 16-year cycle of survival. For a long time, what happened behind the scenes of Bateman's life did not seem unusual to her. It did not appear as a crisis or even something needing examination. From the outside, everything stayed intact. But underneath, a cycle had quietly taken hold. One that started when she was just 16. Anorexia, bulimia, compulsive overeating. It swung between extremes. Yet to her it all felt like part of a single normal. The scale, the tape measure, the constant body awareness were not occasional but perpetual, running in the background of everything she did. The deeper it went, the less room remained for anything else. Food was no longer just food. It followed her into conversations, quiet moments, places it did not belong. Even while talking to people or doing a crossword, her mind stayed locked into counting, measuring, calculating. It moved like an inescapable loop, continuing whether she wanted it to or not. What made it harder to recognize was that she did not think anything was wrong. There was no clear moment of feeling out of control, just a repeating pattern. That shift only came when someone else saw it differently. A friend gently but directly pointed her toward a story that mirrored her own. As she read it, something changed, not suddenly or dramatically, but enough to break through what had been invisible for years. For the first time, she saw it clearly, and once she did, she could not unsee it. From there, the path did not straighten overnight, but it finally gained direction. She entered a 12-step program, approaching it like any addiction, because that was how she had come to understand it. Somewhere within that process, her recovery became tied to something deeper. What began as an attempt to regain control slowly turned into something else entirely, leading her toward an unexpected faith. By the time she emerged, the change was not just in her habits, but in how she saw herself. The version of her that appeared was not built as she had imagined, but it was closer to who she had been trying to become. Then came the delayed degree, Bateman's 30-year detour. By Family Tie's final season, something about the storyline felt almost ironic. On screen, Mallory Keaton was allowed to move forward, entering college and growing into a new life phase. Off-screen, however, Justine found herself stuck in a reality that did not reflect that progress. While her character evolved, she was not given the same freedom, and the gap between the two became impossible to ignore. The moment it became clear came earlier than most realize. At just 17, she had already started planning for college, applying to East Coast schools, assuming she could balance both worlds. To her, it felt obvious. School had always mattered. It was not just something to get through, but something she genuinely enjoyed and excelled at. The idea that she would not go never crossed her mind, until it did. When she presented the plan, hoping to study while returning to Los Angeles for filming when needed, the studio's response shut it down completely. Her contract with Paramount left no room for compromise. Suddenly, something she had always expected for herself was taken off the table. What followed was not a loud decision or dramatic pivot, but something quieter. Life continued. Her career moved in different directions. The years passed without that chapter ever opening. Yet the idea did not disappear. It stayed just out of reach, waiting for a moment that seemed unlikely to come. Then, decades later, it did. In 2012, long after her television peak, she stepped into a classroom again, this time at UCLA. At 46, she was not just returning to school. She was starting over in a space most had already left behind. It was not the easier path. If anything, it came with more pressure, more awareness, and different responsibilities. But the full experience mattered to her. She could have taken a shorter route, easing back through community college and transferring later. But that was not what she wanted. This time, she wanted to do it completely. Once she stepped in, she did not hold back. She built a path reflecting her grown interests, combining computer science with digital media, economics, and business. It was not just about earning a degree. It was about understanding how everything connected: technology, systems, media interaction. Her approach did not go unnoticed. Professors saw it immediately. A level of focus and drive that stood out even among younger students finding their footing. Outside class, that same momentum carried into everything else. She connected with people in tech and investment, took on internships, and shaped ideas beyond theory. Simultaneously, she shared that experience through her blog, telling not only her own journey, but also stories of other women who had returned to education later in life. By 2016, that long-delayed chapter finally concluded. She graduated with a degree in computer science and digital media management, closing a gap left open for decades. The significance was not just in the achievement, but in the timing. The thing she had once been told she could not do, the path blocked at 17, did not disappear. It just waited. And when it finally happened, it did not feel like catching up. It felt like finishing something that had always been hers. If there's one thing people have always wondered about, it is the relationship between Justine and Jason Bateman. Not just what it was back then, but what it became after everything changed. In the world of 1980s sitcoms, they did not simply exist in the same space. They defined it. She rose quickly as Mallory Keaton on Family Ties, instantly recognizable, while he carved out his own presence across multiple shows, building a reputation as the sharp, wisecracking younger star always one step ahead. Together, they were everywhere: interviews, magazine covers, red carpets. Two siblings moving through fame side by side. Over time, that image faded, not dramatically or all at once, but enough to notice. As Justine stepped away from the Hollywood that had once defined her, and Jason moved deeper into it, becoming a steady, undeniable force in television and film. Their appearances together became rare. In that space, people started filling in blanks. Distance turned into speculation. A comment Jason made years later about how relationships, even between siblings, must be earned rather than assumed, only added to that narrative. It sounded distant on the surface, like something had shifted beneath. But that was not where the story started. Before any of that, before cameras and recognition, they were just two kids in a house without the usual structure. Their mother's job kept her away for weeks at a time, and their father was often absorbed in his own creative work. That left them with early independence. They were not closely managed or constantly supervised. They learned to handle things on their own. That independence did not disappear when acting entered their lives. It deepened, because once they started working, everything changed at once. Acting was not just opportunity, it became responsibility. Their parents stepped in as managers, and suddenly the stakes were no longer abstract. Their income mattered. Their work mattered. Even school was tied directly to whether they could keep working at all. The pressure was clear. If grades dropped, work permits disappeared. And if that happened, everything else followed. That kind of pressure does not sit lightly, especially at that age. For both, success came before identity fully formed. They learned to perform before having space to figure out who they actually were. Jason would later describe that experience as something that slowed that process, making it harder to separate himself from roles played for so long. Still, in those early years, something unique existed in what they shared. Justine's career took off quickly, more visibly, while Jason's moved in a steadier, less explosive way. But they were both there, both working, both part of the same world. And that created a bond not easy to replicate. It was not just family. It was a shared experience under pressure most around them could not fully understand. As they got older, however, the paths started to separate, not suddenly, but inevitably. Jason stayed in motion, but that motion was not always stable. After years of working, he stepped back, choosing to release some pressure. What followed was a period that pulled him into excess, into a lifestyle that eventually cost him career momentum. He would later admit that staying in that space too long set him back, forcing him to rebuild something once taken for granted. Justine's shift looked different. The weight of fame had already started to feel like too much. It was not just the work, it was the constant visibility, the inability to exist without being watched. The experience, as she described it, felt mentally exhausting. Even in moments that should have felt exciting, something underneath made it hard to stay grounded. Over time, that feeling did not ease. It became clearer. Around that same period, their personal lives moved through overlapping spaces. She was connected to the same fast-paced world, including her relationship with Leif Garrett, whose own life carried its own chaos. At one point, their worlds intersected unexpectedly, with Jason and Garrett even sharing moments that blurred lines between their separate lives. But those chapters did not define what came next. They were part of a phase both eventually moved through. As years passed, what looked like distance between them took shape, but not as people assumed. Jason rebuilt his career, finding a rhythm that carried him into long-term success. Justine stepped further from the spotlight, choosing to build something not reliant on constant visibility, writing, directing, exploring ideas on her own terms. From the outside, that difference created an easy narrative. One sibling rising, the other stepping back. One staying visible, the other fading out. In that contrast, people assumed tension, something unresolved beneath. But reality did not follow that script. What they had simply changed. Jason's perspective made that clear. To him, relationships were not automatic just because shared by blood. They had to be built, shaped into something that worked in the present, not just inherited from the past. That did not mean distance. It meant intention. It meant choosing how they connected rather than relying on proximity or expectation. That same clarity showed up when outside voices tried to pull them into conflict, especially around differences. Whether politics or public opinion, neither allowed that to define what existed between them. Justine made that boundary firm, shutting down any attempt to turn their relationship into public debate. Jason, in his own way, reflected that same respect, speaking about her choices not as something to question, but as something that made sense for who she was. Even when it came to her stepping away from acting, he did not frame it as loss. He saw it as independence, someone too aware, too capable to stay tied to an industry that did not align with how she wanted to live. The difference between their careers was not something to measure. It was simply where they ended up. Away from all that, their lives settled into something steadier. Both built families. Both found long-term relationships that held. Both moved into spaces reflecting who they had become rather than who they had been expected to remain. The intensity that once defined their early years did not disappear. It just shifted into something quieter, more controlled. Even how they spend time together now reflects that shift. It is not constant, not public, but it is real. The connection is not built on showing up. It is built on understanding, conversations that carry weight, time that feels intentional, a dynamic that looks less like obligation and more like friendship.